Tēnā koutou katoa and hello everybody. Welcome to the Lentil Intervention Podcast. My name is Ben Adelberg and I'm coming to you from Tamaki Makaurau, Auckland. Tēnei ka mihi ki te mana whenua o Aotearoa. And we acknowledge the local tribal authorities of New Zealand.
And g'day, I'm Emma Strutt and I'm currently coming to you from Darumbal country in Queensland. Before we dive into our conversation today, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea and community.
New Zealand has 15,000 kilometres of coastline, the 9th longest in the world, and Australia has the 6th longest at just under 60,000 kilometres. We are surrounded by water, our various surrounding seas and oceans, which are part of the body that covers approximately 70% of our planet. Yet for so many of us, it is simply incomprehensible as to how vast it is, whilst also crucial to the well-being of our planet. For a while now, we've been wanting to have a representative of Sea Shepherd on our show, and we are absolutely stoked to finally make it happen.
That's right. So today we are so lucky to be speaking with Lauren Sandeman, a passionate advocate and activist for ocean conservation. Lauren has been involved with Envoy Shark Cull as their operations director for the Nets Out Now campaign. But now Lauren is also working for the Sea Shepherd team as their first threatened species campaigner. Most people would already be kept pretty busy by that, but Lauren is also finishing her Master of Laws, focusing on international marine environmental law. And honestly, that is just scratching the surface of her very impressive CV. So we've got lots of interesting stuff to talk about today. Lauren, thank you so much for joining us.
Nah, thank you for having me. And just coming on, I'm coming from the land of the Ngunnawal and Ngambri people and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging as well.
Lauren, just before you came on show, I was telling Emma that, when I first came across you, I thought, gosh, I think, I initially thought she was in her late 30s with so much that she's achieved. But you're so young and yet achieved so much. Tell us a little bit about your backstory. I know you've got a fascinating story that starts way back when you were little. Tell us about Lauren. Who is she and why your passion for the ocean?
Okay, starting with the small questions there. I guess I had a bit of an unconventional upbringing in that, to start with, I was born in Hong Kong. I come from a defense family. So I was born in Hong Kong and then actually grew up a little bit in Hawaii. So up until the age of 7, I was brought up on the shores of Honolulu, where I very much fell head over heels in love with the ocean and never wanted to leave it. But unfortunately, at the age of 7, I had to go through what I call the world's worst downgrade, and my family moved from Honolulu to Canberra, where I lived out the rest of my childhood. So went from everything ocean to everything but down here in Canberra. From then, growing up in Hawaii, it really left a lasting impact, to say the least. So growing up, I always had that love for the ocean and continued to want to do more to, work for it, but very much grew up in an area that wasn't ocean focused. And a lot of people, most of the coastal states, everyone goes up near or around the ocean. I didn't have that luxury from 7 onwards. So I very much grew up around the politics and land focused with things when I still very much fostered my love for the ocean. So growing up, I did everything I could to be back on the water. And that led me to get involved with a very unconventional sport called dragon boating, where I was very fortunate to actually end up representing Australia several times and, becoming a world champion in that sport and traveling the world representing Australia as a teenager. Unfortunately, it's not a very well-known sport, so there wasn't much in there for career opportunities. And the ocean called me back, so I hung up my green and gold jersey for my degree, where I ended up going to university to study marine biology. And I quickly realized from the science side of things is that a lot of issues in marine conservation and from the science side is that it's not just about science. It's not about facts. It's not about data. There are so many different facets that intersect when it comes to marine conservation. That's the science, it's the policy, it's the law, it's the advocacy and communication. So I quickly realized that I needed to really understand all those different components to actually be effective in advocating for its conservation. So I ended up in a Masters of Law. I'm hopefully finishing my Masters of Law this year, majoring in law of the sea. But along the way, education has been kind of the cornerstone of all my advocacy work. But growing up especially in the water sports I did, competing in Hong Kong Harbour through different water channels around the world, I became very aware of the impact of plastic pollution. And plastic pollution was really kind of the focal issue that really got me into personal advocacy for marine conservation. And so I was very fortunate to, in my time, in my short years still, to be very involved in marine plastic pollution. I started my own, co-started my own initiative called Cosplay Cleanup Global, where we actually took an unconventional approach to this issue, where we paired Comic Cons and cosplayers to do beach cleanups at their local areas dressed up as superheroes. Because one topic I'm very big about empowering is empowering people to be everyday superheroes. And when it comes to ocean conservation, we need everyday people making everyday changes that's actually going to get us across the line for this issue. So it was kind of taking that visual representation to take people dressed up as superheroes, conducting everyday acts of superheroism in cleaning up their local beaches. And that was pretty successful. I got invited to do a TED talk on the topic, got invited and sent out to the UN in Thailand to talk about that intersection of plastic pollution, individual empowerment, to actually drive change. And it took me around the world, took me to Bali to work with some NGOs there, took me to work with as a sustainability lead, I should say, with United People Global, where I was very fortunate to meet with other international advocates across a myriad of issues, to be trained up with them about how to talk about sustainability issues, to learn from each other, to network, which is such a key component in conservation, is you're utilizing your own network to drive change. And that's very much been what I've been passionate about. And one day I happened to come across this documentary I heard that was coming up called Envoy Shark Cull, that I had never heard about any shark control measures happening on the east coast of Australia. And so I started to research more and more into it and became absolutely horrified by what I found. So I ended up reaching out to the director, Andre Burrell, who has been on this podcast, and asked, essentially saying, hey, this is me, this is my skill set, what can I do to help? And that led to the start of an excellent relationship where I came on board the Envoy team to help drive the campaign after the release of the documentary for Nets Out Now, which in a roundabout way led me to my role today with Sea Shepherd, an organization I've admired for my whole life. So I guess that's the summary, of my life to date. Sorry.
Chapter one of the life of Lauren. We'll definitely come back to Envoy, I think, because it's going to be quite pertinent to what we're going to talk about. But for our listeners, season 2, it's already 2 years ago, episode 35, full in-depth chat with Andre about the film itself and some components that we're actually going to talk about now. But you mentioned Sea Shepherd. I've also been a massive fan of the organization globally. And I encourage a lot of people to donate like I do, and it's a very worthwhile cause, and we'll learn a little bit more about why. Start off, Sea Shepherd, who are they and what's their purpose? How did they come about?
Yeah, so Sea Shepherd's an international non-profit marine conservation organization that campaigns to defend, conserve, and protect the world's oceans. And it aims to do that through protecting marine wildlife and preventing the destruction of marine habitat. So the main issues that Sea Shepherd seeks to address through direct action, so physically being on the water and doing effective marine conservation, is the 3 main issues are climate change, illegal, unregulated, unreported fishing, and marine plastic pollution are the main areas that Sea Shepherd addresses.
And I mean, Sea Shepherd's approach, it's much more than just advocacy work. You guys step in and end up doing what the authorities can't or won't do. So you're out there, you're actually taking action to protect the oceans and the wildlife that lives in it. I think most of the people in our corner of the world would be very familiar with the Antarctic anti-whaling campaigns, but you guys do so much more than that. So you've mentioned some of those key areas that you concentrate on. What are some of the campaigns around that?
Yeah, our main campaigns focus on addressing illegal, unregulated, and unreported fishing. Like you said, without effective enforcement, a lot of fishing measures aren't effective. So Sea Shepherd really steps up to fill those voids. So Sea Shepherd partners with national authorities over in Africa, such as like Gabon, Liberia, Namibia, and Tanzania, to name a few, where essentially we provide ships and crew, and they provide law enforcement officers, and we go out and arrest and detain illegal fishing vessels, either that they're operating there illegally or their catch isn't entirely what they've reported it to be, and essentially work with authorities to prevent and reduce illegal fishing in those waters. And to date, since 2016, those operations have led to the arrest and detention of over 80 illegal fishing vessels.
And is it true that, and I've probably got this very wrong, but a very recent new addition to the fleet of Sea Shepherd is a past illegal fishing trawler?
Illegal fishing, no. So I think you're referring to the Alan K. Is that our most recent? Yeah, so that was repurposed. So it was a former fishing vessel that's now being repurposed for marine conservation. So the Alan K is now actually back en route to Antarctica. So we're actually heading back down to Antarctica for a completely new campaign now, which is very exciting.
Now, to our listeners, it's only because I've followed Sea Shepherd for so long and attended some of your, I don't know, sort of little seminars that you put on, especially when I was in Queensland, because Sea Shepherd's very active in that area. But I just want the listeners to understand that the campaigns that are run and the time spent at sea, it's not just, let's just go for a little patrol. Oh, there's a boat. You know, it's pulled in a few undersized fish or some no-nos, and you know, let's slap a few fines on them. These are significant missions, if we call them. You know, some of the big successes we've had, they've been months at sea. They've been, you know, there's been legal battles, or there's been, you know, it's a lot of work, and it requires not just dedication, but honestly, the toughness of the volunteers, especially, is just incredible, and the wins are significant. You know, the achievements are just, I don't know. Give us some examples, because they're massive. They're not little things. These are big deals.
Well, I guess some of our most prominent wins, like going back to our whaling campaign. So Sea Shepherd was active between 2002 to 2018. To end illegal whaling in the Southern Ocean. And in 2018, we were successful in that Japan pulled out of whaling in the Antarctic region and returned to their home waters. So we helped end illegal whaling in the Southern Ocean, saved over 6,000 whales to date and counting, and they haven't returned. We've helped arrest the end of, I guess, the big 8 illegal toothfish, Patagonian toothfish fishery back in the Antarctic, which actually the end of the Thunder, I should say, was actually the longest hot pursuit on the high seas to record. It lasted over 150 or so days, which was continuous pursuit of this illegal vessel and tracing it into national waters of a country that was willing to arrest and detain this fishing vessel. So we helped end that notorious fleet of 8 ships from illegal fishing in the Antarctic waters. Every vessel we arrest and detain off the coast of Africa, that's hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of animals saved from that line. And we're going back down to the Antarctic, targeting krill fishing to really shed a light onto that issue. A lot of issues in the ocean is out of sight, out of mind. And a big part not only is effective being on the water as an enforcement presence, but it's also raising the spotlight and the profile of these issues for people to actually be aware of. Take, krill fishing, for example. People aren't aware of that krill fishing. Krill is used to feed salmon, farm salmon, to make it pink. And it's also used in krill oil supplements. So it's issues like that. That's very much a consumer-led demand. So it's about highlighting the whole chain and the whole story of these campaigns so that people on the ground can actually help contribute to make a difference and lead and drive these wins as well.
And something I know that you're personally very passionate about, because I watched your fantastic TEDx talk, which of course we'll have in the show notes, is marine debris, so plastics in our ocean. As you mentioned, Sea Shepherd has a campaign around this, so I'd really encourage anyone who's interested to actually jump on the website and take a big look at that. But what are some of the key things that people should know about plastics in the ocean and the extent of it?
The extent to it, this could be its whole show, honestly. So I guess when it comes to marine plastic pollution for the everyday person, it's important to know about 8 million tons of plastic makes its way into the ocean every year. So for a bit of a scale, that's about one garbage truck equivalent every minute. That number is only expected to double by 2050, and then double again in the next several decades after that, with business as usual protection. So that's about everyday consumption. That's about the current recycling measures. It's about people letting things continue as usual. That's the trajectory we're on. When it comes to the impact of marine plastic in the oceans, it's it's really hard to over exaggerate the impact, whether that comes from entanglement risks of marine animals through to the ingestion of plastic, not only in marine animals and seabirds, but also in the human food chain. We're finding microplastics literally in every ecosystem and every facet of the world now, because the problem is so pervasive, whether that's in rainwater, in core ice samples, in our own food chain. Humans are eating microplastic now because it's so pervasive. The issue has just permeated into every facet of not only our lives, but our ecosystems. And the impact that has in terms of physical entanglement risk, in terms of poison pollution, because people don't know this, but plastics are great sponges at absorbing toxins in their surrounding environment. And when you eat that, those toxins can get released into our own, into our own bodies. But the most terrifying part, I think, is that we still don't know the full extent of this impact. We're talking, in the benthic seabed, we're talking how it impacts humans in terms of why we're eating plastic and how the impact that has, in terms of how much more plastic is, throughout every element of our ecosystem. We know so much and it's so bad. But what's even more terrifying is the full impact that we don't know yet.
What is the possible link between climate change and the immense plastic pollution in the oceans? It's a very tricky question. I'm putting you on the spot, but in New Zealand, we've just had 2 massive storms, massive series of climatic events, and a huge amount of problems that it's caused. And now a lot gets washed out to sea as a result. Now, those are one-off events that happen, but, of course, plastic pollution is from continual pollution. But there is now the risk that with climate change, more is coming off land and into the oceans, isn't there?
And not forgetting what it's a byproduct of also. Sorry.
Yeah, 2 parts of that, I guess. 80% of marine plastic pollution comes from land-based sources. So that comes from stormwater runoff. It comes from illegal dumping. It comes from, littering. It comes from all these different land-based sources. So what you eat and consume directly has an impact in terms of wrapping and plastic into the oceans. In terms of the impact on climate change, well, most plastic is made from oil. Most plastic created is virgin plastic. It's that oil consumption. We recycle only about 9% of plastic we create, and the rest of that comes from fossil fuels. So it's this linked cycle directly with the fossil fuel industry that's supplying the plastic industry. Our recycling sector is not up to speed to, in terms of actually creating a circular economy. But on top of that, like I say in my TED Talk, it's not about when your sink is overflowing, you don't reach for a better mop, you turn off the tap. It's about addressing the source of these issues, which is in the consumption of virgin plastic at its source, which is us on the land.
And what are the talking points then for the Sea Shepherd campaign that people should take away? What should we start actioning to reduce that?
For marine plastic pollution?
Yeah.
So the very first thing, well, several things. In terms of the everyday, what you can do is to start limiting your consumption of plastic. So the basic things, I know that they're basic, but they're actually so important. It's things like looking at what you do with like keep cups, reusable water bottles, even like at your shopping. Do you use those flimsy plastic bags for vegetables and fruits? What do you do and how do you consume plastic in your everyday and start to reduce that? Then you look bigger. Sea Shepherd, I'd invite everyone to come and attend. We conduct local beach cleanups all across the country, nearly at least once a month. Come to your local beaches, to your local waterways, attend a cleanup or offer to host a cleanup to make an impact. We, part of the Marine Debris Campaign, actually catalogues what's found and how much of it is found, and that feeds into a national database. So it's so important that we actually understand what's being consumed, what's being dumped, where it turns up and how, and that feeds into the bigger picture. We also have, massive regional cleanups as part of our marine debris campaign, which our regional coordinator conducts, and so they go over to highly remote areas such as Christmas and Cocos Islands, conduct week-long cleanups with local groups, with Indigenous rangers all across the country to actually target the really big areas that no one actually gets to go out to every day. And we're taking tons of plastic and fishing materials and just waste getting washed up and dumped in these areas.
Let's talk about your key focus at Sea Shepherd, Shark Defense Campaign. Why sharks? What's the issue with them?
When it comes to sharks, well, why sharks? Well, sharks are the coolest. I think I should say off the bat, I'm definitely biased with that. But they're a keystone species for our ecosystem. Sharks are so crucial for the entire oceans. We can't have a healthy ocean without sharks. Sharks are important. Not only, we call them the doctors of the ocean. They're not only important for maintaining healthy populations of fish and ecosystems, but they also play an important role in maintaining the equilibrium amongst ecosystems that keep them functional and thriving. And they're actually important for ensuring biodiversity throughout the marine ecosystem, which makes it stronger and more resilient to threats like climate change. Our shark defense campaign started in 2013 over in WA when they proposed a massive shark cull over there in response to a spate of shark bites that had occurred. And it has evolved since the success of helping to end the WA shark cull. Looking over to the East Coast, which deals with the barbaric shark control programs of Queensland and New South Wales, which use shark nets and drum lines to actively kill sharks as a form of outdated bather protection.
Tell us then about, human-shark interactions, because I know as an Australian, I mean, we play it up, but everything he wants to kill us, right? So, like, most people when they go to the beach, if they're an Aussie, probably have somewhere in the back of their head, oh, there's sharks in these waters. We need to be a little bit cautious, or some people might be even quite apprehensive. I know some people are still in support on the Gold Coast, especially within the business community, of the protection. I'm using air quotes here, the protection measures that are still in play there. But realistically, putting all of the emotions aside, what do we need to know about human and shark interactions?
Well, we need to know that they occur. They're incredibly rare events. I mean, you're more likely to die, I think, from a coconut hitting you on the head than from a shark bite, or more likely to die in your car on the way to the beach than by a shark. But there's that, I guess, like you said, there's that disproportionate fear perception when it comes to sharks, and that's definitely been inflamed thanks to some very well-known movies, and is continually inflamed by the media, because shark bites, when they occur, because they're so rare, they're easily inflamed and exacerbated. So it's sensationalizing of a very dramatic, very traumatic, and very hot-selling topic in the media, which is fear. Shark interactions, I think people are actually surprised they occur more often than people realize, but a lot of shark interactions aren't negative. We're talking sharks just swimming by, doing their own thing with people in the water. We've been starting to see a shift in human and shark interactions, mostly from the public, in terms of understanding that sharks aren't out to eat humans. They know that, sharks know that humans aren't part of their natural food chain. So shark bites, when they do occur, most of the time they are what we call mistaken identity bites. So it's a shark coming up to someone going, are you a food source? Takes a bite, goes, no, you're not, swims away. Unfortunately, human biology, most of the areas they bite, we have a lot of arteries exposed everywhere. So shark bites, when they do occur, and if they are fatal, most often happen due to blood loss rather than a shark coming back and gorging a human, that Jaws experience. So in terms of understanding, human and shark interactions, we've seen leaps and strides in the scientific understanding and research of that very dynamic, not only in terms of how sharks interact with humans, how to protect humans from sharks and limiting that interaction, but also people's perceptions of sharks and how we view and see them and our expectations to be protected from them, which all very much feed into informing an effective mitigation strategy that allows humans to safely coexist with sharks, which is what people want. People want to be safe in a healthy marine ecosystem, and an effective and logical shark mitigation measure is crucial to underpinning that.
Now, growing up in South Africa, I too spent a lot of time in the water, grew up on the coast. And for me, it was always drummed into my head, or excuse the pun there, actually, I didn't intend that, to always, go surf, go at a protected beach. Again, air quotes. And Let's talk about the supposed various shark control methods. So I've mentioned nets, but there are other methods as well. Talk us about some of these supposed measures that supposedly keep us safe when we go to the ocean for a swim.
Yeah, so talking about like shark nets and drum lines. So for context, people who are listening who might not understand what we're talking about, shark nets in New South Wales, we're talking about a 150-meter long gill net that's 6 meters wide, and these are set often in waters that's about 10 to 12 meters deep. So it's a tiny, tiny stretch of gill net that doesn't even come halfway up the water column in New South Wales. In Queensland, they're same material shark nets. They vary between 124 meters to 186 meters. Again, they're 6 meters tall, so they don't even cover half the water column. In Queensland, the shark nets are set from the surface and go down to halfway the water column. In New South Wales, they're set towards the bottom and come up. So both are designed to entangle and trap sharks. Queensland operates uses 383 drum lines, which is essentially a baited hook suspended in the middle of the water. And New South Wales uses what they like to call smart drum lines, which is shark management alert in real time. Clever little one, that one. Which is essentially a baited hook on a baited hook suspended in the water that has an alert on it. So if something bites the hook, then an alert goes out. So a contractor will come to the hook within 30 minutes, supposedly, to release the animal. Now, those are the lethal forms of control measures used in these two states. Queensland actively culls sharks. So when one of 19 different species of shark gets caught in a net or hooked on a drum line, they're normally left there for about 3 days, is about the time a contractor will come out to check nets, check drum lines. So it can be suspended there immobile for up to 3 days. If it manages to survive not drowning in that time, and it is a target shark of one of those 19 species, a contractor will pull it up onto the boat, shoot it in its head, and dump it out to sea. In New South Wales, they target 3 species of shark, which is your white, bull, and tiger sharks. And if a shark is entangled in a net and manages to survive, it will be tagged and dragged out to sea and released, which is the only difference. So Queensland very much operates an active culling campaign, whereas New South Wales, with their shark nets, kind of has a bit of a not actively culling it, but not actually doing an effective tagging and release with nets. It's a bit of a grey zone with the New South Wales shark nets.
Talk to us about the bycatch with these methods.
Yep. So you hang a gill net out in the middle of the ocean, you're going to catch anything and anything that can swim into them. So about 85 to 99% of what's caught in shark nets is bycatch. And when we say bycatch, we mean non-target species of sharks. So it's literally anything but those select few species of sharks. So we're talking whales, dolphins, turtles, rays, penguins, seals. If it can swim, if it can get into the water, it can and has been caught in the shark net. And the impact of these programs is essentially a decimation of local marine life. It's quite horrific.
Hence the irony in the term target species. There are protected shark species. How does that work?
Yep. That is an excellent question. So, things like, take the white shark, for example. It's listed in Australia as a vulnerable species. It's meant to be completely protected in federal waters and state waters. One of the main impacts and threats to the species is shark nets. So because these programs have been in operation since the 1930s in New South Wales and the 1960s in Queensland, these programs existed before our federal Environmental Act, the Environmental Protection and Biodiversity Conservation Act. So there's this loophole that means that if any programs that operated prior to when the Act came into force in the 2000s, it essentially is given a free pass from environmental regulation under that Act. So it's up to the states to decide whether or not that program comes under environmental consideration. In Queensland, shark nets and drumlines are specifically excluded from any form of environmental oversight. And in New South Wales, the shark nets, because they're so destructive, they're listed as a key threatening process in New South Wales environmental law, which essentially means it impacts 2 or more threatened species to the point it could be detrimental to the survival of the species. But all that leads to is the New South Wales Environment Department essentially has an agreement with the Fisheries Department that says, as long as you can, conduct the program in this manner, we won't persecute you under the Environmental Act. Now, ironically, that management agreement was actually meant to be reviewed last year, and it was an opportunity because it's listed in New South Wales under as a key threatening process. There's two independent scientific committees that oversee and advise the operation of shark nets in New South Wales. And both committees have turned around and said, these programs don't work and you are not reducing your impact to the environment. Use other measures to protect swimmers and to protect our marine environment and end this program. You would think that would be enough to, scientific independent advice for years calling for the removal of this program, but we actually haven't seen any changes in these programs, despite the mounting scientific evidence that continues to grow year after year.
Speaking of legalities, for anyone following the Sea Shepherd, say, Instagram account or any of the social accounts, and sometimes, one will see a post of an active entanglement. There's a whale, it's just been caught, and we're seeing some footage. And the question that some of these viewers might have is, well, why is no one going and releasing it? Why is no one just jumping in, cutting the nets and letting it go?
Yeah, it is a question we get a lot. So it is illegal to interfere with the equipment in Queensland and New South Wales. So Queensland, since 2019, decided they didn't like Sea Shepherd coming in and filming what was happening on their nets and drumlines. They introduced a 20-metre exclusion zone around the shark nets and drumlines, which means only contractors or licensed authorities can actually come within 20 metres of shark nets and drumlines. So if you breach that exclusion zone, and if you breach that exclusion zone and interact with, cut, damage a net, we're talking about fines in the six figures. So they are heavy penalties are associated with interfering with these nets. And the question we get a lot is, just go out and cut all the nets. You go out and cut a net, by the next day a contractor will replace it. And so you'll be slapped with massive fines, really in trouble with the law because what you've done is illegal, and you have made no impact. And dealing with the frustration of having to, every day see the footage of entanglements from drone footage or, footage that we get from New South Wales of animals caught in these programs, it's horrific. And dealing with that frustration is an issue, I think, for a lot of people involved on this campaign and on in this sector. It eats at you emotionally, but the most effective thing we can do is to target the core of this program, which is to end the lethal components and transition to a modern, non-lethal alternative as fast as we can.
What are some of the alternative control measures that Sea Shepherd want to see us transition to?
The good news is that, especially today in 2023, there are so many scientifically backed alternatives that really it's kind of your choice in a candy store. So you have things such as true barriers and enclosures, which actually enclose off sections of the beach without entangling and killing marine life. So they're designed to actually form a barricade between you and the rest of the ocean. I'm going to name drop some brands here that I'm particularly fond of. So some excellent designs I've seen come from the Eco Shark Barrier. They're deployed over in Western Australia, and they're used in really good areas. Another brilliant design is the Shark Safe Barrier, which creates essentially it biomimics kelp forests and combines that with magnets in its base to effectively act as a natural deterrent to sharks, and because sharks don't like to enter into thick kelp forests. So these barriers have been incredibly effective at actually preventing a shark from entering an area. And that's also the main misconception around shark nets, is that they're designed to be barriers when they're really not. And you see them out on the coastline. They're comically small compared to the rest of the coastline. Sharks are able to swim above, under, all around shark nets. When we can have effective barriers in place that actually give people who want to have that added sense of security that option. Other measures such as personal deterrent devices, so electromagnetic shields around individual users or even electromagnetic barriers themselves. One of the leaders in this space is Ocean Guardian. Their device is so effective and has been held to such a standard that the Western Australian government actually offers a rebate to help people uptake, buy these devices themselves and to encourage people to use them. And they actually have just rolled out a barrier series, so electromagnetic deterrents. So sharks have very unique and highly sensitive senses. And essentially what it does is creates this shield around the user that when a shark approaches within 2 meters, it kind of causes their senses to spasm. And it's not a pleasant experience. So the shark goes, no, thank you, and swims away. My personal favorite and the best one, I think, is drone surveillance. Drone surveillance is by far brilliant because it's eyes in the sky in real time for people. Queensland actually has just recently, start of last year, released their drone report. Since Andre has been on this podcast, they actually have conducted some drone surveillance, and the results of that were astronomical. It was, they spotted, 174 sharks were sighted over their period, which led to 4 beach evacuations. But more importantly, they did a comparison of drone surveillance compared to shark control equipment at the same location. And they found that there was a significantly higher of sharks spotted with drones than was caught in the shark control program equipment when drones were used 2.3% of the time that nets and drum lines were in the water. So they saw more sharks than was caught in the gear for 2.3% of the time deployed. So drones are incredibly brilliant at detecting and tracking and monitoring sharks, and can put out that alert. But drones also have an added benefit where they can actually be used in surf lifesaving to help detect people who are at risk of drowning, who are struggling to swim, which is a much more prevalent risk in the ocean when it comes to surf lifesaving. On top of that as well, we have shark tagging and tracking, which can be brilliant to feed into alerts, as well as a strong public education. People need to understand about the shark's environment and what they can do themselves to help mitigate their own individual risk.
So, as you said, the data is definitely on the side of getting rid of the measures that are in place at the moment. But, you've mentioned, we've talked about there's still this emotional response. And that's probably why these things are still in place because, shark swims past man and doesn't attack him is not exactly like newsworthy. What then do you think is the importance of documentaries like Envoy or other communication mediums, even artworks, for example, to help change the narrative and get this out to the greater community that they're not just something to be feared, and we can have more compassionate, less lethal ways of protecting humans when they're at the beach?
Well, documentaries and that kind of effective media, it's fundamental. Like for me personally, I didn't know these programs even existed until Envoy Shark Cull came out. So a lot of these programs, it's out of sight, out of mind, and documentaries and the media play such an important role to actually let people be aware of what's happening. There's a lot of issues in marine conservation, and actually effectively being able to communicate them, to tell the story behind them, is how people get on board and how people want to actually help affect change. When it comes to, I guess, the impact of shark culling, it's one thing to say, 97% bycatch. It's a statistic. It's not that engaging for people outside of, in the science. So I'm a scientist by training, and it's not statistics are boring. But when you actually show the impact of, sea turtles struggling, when you have a dolphin dead and tangled up in a net where it's been struggling there for hours, it's the visual, emotional impact, and it's emotions that drive these campaigns. And it's the story behind these campaigns that affects change. We're humans, we're emotional beings, and actually being able to empathize, to be angry, to sympathize, to, that emotion is what drives action. And being able to tell that story is, 9/10 of the battle, because you have to tell that story to get people on board to come with you. And to come with you, that's what affects change.
I'm going to digress just a very little here, as always, because this is literally hot off the press. I think yesterday or 2 days ago, the United Nations High Seas Treaty. How do you see that? Do you see that playing a positive role? Obviously, this is bigger picture, but do you think this can actually have an effect on smaller, more regional issues like the shark culling? Do you think that can extend as far as that?
Ooh, that's a really good question. And you've hit the perfect intersection of my passions there with the, law of the sea and science. So I apologize if I ramble. So yeah, this new treaty, it's very exciting and it's very promising because we actually we haven't had anything in this area to regulate the high seas. It's been kind of the wild west of the world for, all of mankind. So actually having this treaty come in, it's taken, 20 years for this treaty to actually be agreed upon. So it's been a very long time in the making. I think it's an incredibly positive step in the right direction. However, what this treaty lacks is actually the impact to bring current fishing measures under environmental assessment. So it's setting up that position for the future, but it's without effective enforcement and regulation of what we have currently. It's it's great, but it's not actually attacking the main issue or the main picture. So it's important. It's important that we actually celebrate such important and big victories, but we need to be realistic about the impact, the actual impact it has on the oceans. And without effective enforcement, and without actually being able to, I guess, kind of come over the top of existing measures, it's not going to really change a lot that currently is operating in terms of a fishing measure. When it comes to shark culling, it's interesting because there's already a lot of international, treaties, agreements, memorandums of understanding when it comes to sharks. Sharks are highly migratory. These aren't, when we talk about killing sharks in Australia, we're not just killing Australian sharks. We're killing the world sharks. These sharks have, traveled from, to Indonesia, across, all across the country, transect oceans. The feats of how far they traveled is truly astounding. And so there's already a lot of international measures in place meant to protect sharks. I think it's worthwhile noting that we've only just had at the end of last year the listing of 50 something new species on CITES, so the Convention of the International Trade of Endangered Species. So that's going to essentially try and bring about over like 90% of the shark fin trade industry under regulatory standards. So we're seeing this big push for shark conservation in particular within just the last several months, which is amazing to see. But when it comes to international law, a lot of it requires the state to step up and do things within their own laws. And so a lot of when it comes to shark culling in particular, it requires Australia to step up and to actually, put its money where its mouth is. Australia is party to a lot of these treaties and signatories, and the culling of sharks directly contradicts all of those commitments. So it's really this gray area of Australia likes to put on this face and likes to push forward a really strong marine conservation focus, but its money isn't, well, its actions and its words aren't lining up. So I think a huge part of that is getting people to actually be aware of what we're saying, what we're doing, that misalignment, and people actually being able to put that political pressure on the representatives to say, hey, this isn't okay, and I actually want you to put your neck out and step up on this issue. And so that ties back to a lot of what people every day can do as a campaigner, and I've been in this role nearly a year to the day actually. I cannot overstate the importance of individual people actually stepping up and doing things like, signing that petition, turning up to rallies. The most important thing is directly emailing or messaging. Hell, write a letter. Letter writing is so outdated. No one gets letters these days. It's something new. It's something dramatic for politicians to get a handwritten letter. Write out to your political representatives to put pressure on them. They want to hear from people, and you are the people. Everyone's the people. It's about raising the profile of these issues and driving it so that our representatives don't really have anywhere to go. We've got, when it comes to shark culling, we've got the science behind it. We've got, the years of recommendations. We've got all these alternatives. And the final barrier is a frustratingly political hurdle. And, having talked to these politicians myself in person, it's about, they want to hear more. Unfortunately, they need to hear more from people. And it's about people driving change, even though the science should be leading the way.
I think that's such an important message, because with any problem that's as big as this and it's global, for an individual, it can seem huge and insurmountable, and it can make you feel really quite powerless. And I know that I'm never going to be able to protect the whole ocean, but I can help protect my little corner of it. And that's so important for giving someone a bit of grounded hope moving forward.
Yeah, absolutely. I really like to say people significantly underestimate the impact they have as an individual. And people often feel overwhelmed by, these massive issues when it comes to environmental conservation. And I always say the best thing about an overwhelming issue is that there are numerous ways that you can actually get involved and make an impact. And so when it comes to you and your network, making change and taking action yourself has such a substantial impact. People, when they actually start to take steps and start to talk about these issues, start to do things themselves. I get messages all the time, people who are genuinely amazed just how far their own voice goes. So never, ever underestimate or discount your voice. You don't have to be a scientist. You don't have to be the director of a marine conservation organization. Every single person in every single facet of life has something to contribute to marine conservation, to environmental conservation, because the issues our oceans face and the issues our planet face are systemic issues. And people, no matter what you do with your life, make up that system. So there is a way that you can be involved that makes an impact.
Such a powerful message. As someone who used to often swim beyond the shark nets, I never felt in danger. I mean, probably young, stupid naivety, but I've had innocent interactions with sharks, smaller sharks swim between my legs as I'm getting in the water. Once you learn to understand the species, you learn more about the respect of the sharks than to be fearful. You've spoken a lot about the power of individual action, which a lot of our guests do, and we very often speak about the importance of communication in the field of science. And effectively, you're bridging that gap because you're bringing your science background and bringing this into the advocacy work. But, a lot of individuals still feel tentative about doing it on themselves. Sea Shepherd is a platform that can do it for them. How can an individual support or get involved with Sea Shepherd?
There are a million ways. I started off myself as an onshore volunteer with Sea Shepherd. So people who, run the stalls, you get trained up to talk about the campaigns we work on. You can do things with education outreach, or you can help on our merch stalls, which, sells it, helps us raise money to actually fund our ships. It costs a lot of money to run several ships all the time. That's the main way to get, those are direct volunteer opportunities. You can sign up to attend, marine debris cleanups. You can sign up to attend regional cleanups with enough experience actually operating in the marine debris sector. You can even volunteer to go on ships. I think most people are actually surprised to learn that the majority of our crew across all our ships and our campaigns are volunteers. They're everyday people like you and me who said put their hand up, said, no, I'll do this. I can get trained to do this. I can learn and make an impact. Obviously there are sections on the crew that are very highly specialized, from like the captain to the engineer. But there's, in terms of volunteering with this organization, you can start small. You can start small on shore, or you can spend months out in the high sea. There's really that variation in between. And even within that as well, you can, we've got full members like me. I interact a lot with my New South Wales coordinators. There are roles within the voluntary side of things that can vary depending on how involved you want to get. So really, when it comes to Sea Shepherd, the sky's the limit on how involved you want to be and what issues you want to get involved on. And we're always open for more volunteers, new volunteers, because our volunteers are the backbone for our organization. And there's so many different avenues and different campaigns to get involved in, to help and to utilize your own skill set to help this organization.
Lauren, thank you so much for all the amazing work that you do. Thank you to Sea Shepherd for the amazing work that they do. It's certainly far from over. You've got a lot of, hard yards ahead of you. So, we're only so appreciative of organizations like yourselves, of what you do for our community, what you do for sort of biodiversity. If the sharks could thank you, they thank you. If the whales could thank you, they thank you. But thank you so much for your precious time as well, coming onto the show, connecting with us. It's been an absolute treat, and we wish you the best of luck in completing your studies as well. So thank you.
Thanks, guys. I look forward to talking to you in the future.
Thank you for listening to the Lentil Intervention Podcast. If you found this interesting, make sure you subscribe and share it with your friends.